All right. Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Transform Sales Podcast. This is the Sales Agency Growth Edition. And today we have the pleasure of having Steve Schmidt, Head of Commercial Revenue at Regi.ai and former Sales Development Agency owner as our guest today. How's it going, Steve?
It's going good. It's going great. 5 weeks. I'll be in that sunlight that's coming through to your right, camera left. I'm in a dark basement here in South Dakota, man, but I couldn't resist getting on here to talk about what we're going to talk about today. It's a good, meaty subject. And I think it's, as you and I said, it's something that I think a lot more people would be interested in hearing about this side of business as well.
Absolutely. We appreciate you coming down and look forward to you coming down to enjoy this city of internal spring with us. So let's set it off.
82 degrees year round, right?
Yeah. Spring year round. Anybody listening, if you're in a climate that just becomes a burden at some point, feel free to come down to Medellin, Colombia. So to kick it off, the objective of our show, right, is to identify challenges and things that are working well and best practices, right, that could help sales agencies to scale more predictably and profitably. So we're sharing lessons, sharing experiences so that we could all get bigger and better. So we're going to have, Steve, give us a little bit of background about your experience as a sales development agency owner to kind of kick it off and set it up for folks.
Yeah, sure, Tony. Probably like a lot of people, I did not graduate high school or college thinking that, hey, I want to own a sales development agency. Never had heard of one, right? I did work in a call center in college for about 3 weeks. And, we go out in the alley and like smoke cigarettes and I was like, it was a contest to see who could last the longest, but that isn't at all a sales development agency, as I found out. I think for me, it was just 20 years in the leadership space and seeing a void a lot of people do, which is access to call it funnel on demand, right? Whether it was I was at T-Mobile and we were doing big forklift projects as we were developing that US team, building that business from call it 0 to 100 million in about 3 years. At T-Mobile, like there was a big need for it there. Saw that, trained, was brought in on a team, trained up 60 call center reps in Tennessee that then transformed since then into sales development with the full outbound motion. And so it wasn't new to me. I think the idea of what was new to me is, Tony, like we talked about, which is, hey, I'm going to do this. It's not just an idea. I didn't just buy the domain. I didn't just tell my 10 closest friends about it. I didn't just have one client. I had 0 clients. I had like none. And so actually, like literally 0. And so when I decided to do the business, it was not with anything but my entire life savings. And so, that wasn't a ton. It was a good amount, but taking $300,000 and taking that gamble and saying like, I will use this if we need to grow. I had no idea, Tony, that we would be, north of 50 employees, north of 4.7 million the first year sold, and then a total of 7.5 million in 18 months. Like I had no idea. My whole goal, if I went back, because when we were talking, I did have a goal. I had a revenue goal, not just a net revenue goal, but I went back and looked at my goals and said, if we hit a $1 million in year one, what are you going to do to celebrate? I never celebrated, never even remembered when we crossed the line. We crossed that one in 90 days.
90 days. All right. So 90 days, you can see, if you guys are listening, you could tell that there's a little trend here in the sense of, Steve, he started out the box with Title. He launched his sales agency Title in 2020. And his objective was to grow as quickly as possible. So hyper growth was the goal, right? So his goal was to become the fastest growing sales development agency in the world. And what he just shared with us is in 90 days, you crossed the $1 million revenue mark for Title at that time, right?
20 employee. Yeah, we hired our 21st employee. We just crossed $1 million.
Wow. So then let's go ahead and dig into it. We got here, so we're going to go ahead and say, hey, what was the plan? And then we're going to identify what some of the things that you would do differently if you had it all to redo. So I'm going to share with the audience. The plan was to get to the fastest growing sales development agency in the world by 1, using content marketing to attract clients and talent efficiently at scale. 2, becoming the #1 place for top SDR talent in order to deliver higher success rates than competing agencies. And then 3, sell at the highest valuation a 45% profit margin could get, right? So, without further ado, today you're going to find out what went right, what went wrong, and how Steve would approach things if he had the opportunity to do it all over again. So, let's kick off with content marketing.
Yeah,
Tell
man.
us a little bit about that. How did that work out?
Yeah, the content is, to me, it breathed life in the organization, right? Where other agencies, Tony, we're not doing content. I mean, you
Mhm.
would be hard pressed to go find any content that isn't called SEO or paid advertising for Memory Blue. Go down the list, right? The big three, the big five, Science, Jump Crew. Like nobody's organically posting from those organizations, at least not that I've seen or heard of. And I've researched it pretty damn well. But they also would say that they don't need to. And I would say, you're right. You probably don't need to. For me, I did not have $50,000 a month to go spend on SEO or G2. So we were forced to do free content.
Huh.
And so I think for me to go into that, Tony, it was, hey, I didn't, Jake Dunlap, Josh Braun, and Justin Welsh had just started creating content like 5 years ago that I was following. And so those are the three people I remember seeing. And then Chris Walker from Refine Labs came on the scene. And I just sat there and I was like, if these guys are literally saying, steal my roadmap, let's go ahead and say, let's go ahead and just steal my playbook. And I did. And I did the three pillars. They said, pick three pillars. I went and hired a ghostwriter. She was awesome, had her for 18 months so she could help me ideate and do all the different things to get through that, because creating that content, Tony, we quickly found out was the business was dependent upon it, not only for revenue, but we also were dependent upon it for talent marketing.
So then so it obviously it got you the visibility that you wanted with clients and talent.
Yep.
Could you walk us through a little bit about your action plan for your content marketing?
Yeah.
Like how many posts, how frequently were you doing this thing? What was kind of your formula?
No AI, no schedule. Not because, I mean, almost like I didn't even think of that at the time. So everything was done with a ghostwriter. So she would interview me every Thursday. And so by Thursday, Tony, in the agency business, especially, like enough shit has happened that week that you're going to be like, you're going to have plenty to talk about. Right. And so she would just ask me questions like, how was your week going? Hey, Steve, last week you mentioned this, tell me more about it. And that would develop the content. And, by answering questions, she would say, like, tell me about a meeting this week where it went good. Tell me where it went bad. I would say, oh God, da, 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 ramble on and verbally process. And she would just be like, okay, great. And she would go back and watch the game tape, write a first draft or two, send it to me, see if we were thematically on point. And over time, she got to know my voice. So it wasn't so much me ever rewriting it. She really started to understand what that natural voice was, for the most part, very, very well. I do think for high volume executives, because they're busy, that's it, not because they have a fancy title. They should be doing content, but most don't, even if they would be great at it, because they don't have time. And so
Right.
sometimes you need people to help you say what you need to say who know you extremely well. And that proved we could scale quickly that way. And so we were doing three pillars, right? So we pick three every quarter to focus on. Examples would be like, one is cold calling, right? Just everything about cold calling. Number two is growth, right? We wrote a lot about growth. Everybody heard about growth. And then three was more of a personal, me, Steve, the person, right? Because we wanted to have a 40% personal, 60% business. So we refresh those and we'd say, are these working out or not? Is that hitting or not? And if it wasn't, then we would reiterate quickly. So it's like A/B testing content in real time, just like we A/B tested sequences. So over time, got pretty good at that, where honestly, by the end of it, I would know a post when it went up, because it was something that we just went over in an interview that week, but I wouldn't see it until it went up. And I'd say, holy shit, that's a lot like what I said, but it was said better than what I said, because I'm just answering for the first time, which is not always the best way to get content.
Nice. And I heard one thing in there in your explanation that's kind of the hack is you didn't just use a ghostwriter where it's like, hey, write about cool stuff for me and post on my behalf. She actually was talking to you to get some feedback about what happened the previous week.
Yeah.
And extracting that. So that probably also helped to have a more authentic voice.
Yeah. I think you just, it's kind of like some people say, well, I can't afford a ghostwriter. I don't want to do a ghostwriter. I said, great. Go take all your Zoom meetings, get somebody on Fiverr and say, I want you to comb through all my Zoom meetings, find the best moments, and then make micro clips out of them. Never post anything the customer says, take their name out, da, 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 boom, there you got content. Like, it could be that easy if you wanted to go very basic.
Yeah. So how about this? How many posts a week were you doing? How are
Oh,
you
we
kind
were
of
doing 15, man. It was intense.
how are you guys checking and tracking to kind of evaluate your content, see what was working, what didn't,
Yeah.
and how you might move forward?
The one thing I always measured was I never cared as much, and I still don't, about the likes than I do the comments, but even more so the people who reach out to you. The more I've niched down and tried to say, I just don't give a shit about that, or I'm not even act like I do like that. Because the more I've just said, this is who I am and this is what I do, and take it or leave it. I'm kind of a recovering, not only a recovering alcoholic in my real life, but also like in my real life, a recovering people pleaser. And I've learned a lot about that this year. Worked a lot with my, my therapist, who I was already seen since I got out of rehab. Is it's okay to be able to say something and get it out on content. It should still feel creative. It should not be meant to get a like or an approval from anybody. It should just be put out there, and people like it. They will agree with what you're saying and probably want more of it. And so I've never been more comfortable approaching call it content, because being honest is the only way to approach content. And there's so much bullshit out there, including a lot of the stuff I used to say, man, like saying the thing that people wanted to hear.
That's powerful.
People forget to tell you your audiences will change too. Like this person might be like someone who really, really likes you this year, but then next year they don't need you. And it's not that they don't like you. It's that you serve the purpose and the void that they needed to get the information. Because they move on to somebody else, they're just flipping the channel and say, man, I got a new favorite show. You were great. I got that out of there. And so you have to continually like recruit new people. You don't just get a permanent audience that's built in. Like a good swag of those people who come in and start to engage will be gone in 6 months. They'll still be connected to you, but they no longer feel the need to comment or like on anything. As a matter of fact, they might have even, God forbid, unfollowed you, but still want to connect with you and see your stuff. And so taking the ego out of it and really looking at the business performance, that has not been impacted at all from a call it top line level. Not having ownership of the business here for a little bit in 22 and 2023. I will say this is it's neither good nor bad, but creating content when you are the last sort of approval layer is way different than when you're working for a company and creating it. So hats off to all the AEs and SDRs out there, agency owners who are putting content out. Well, agency owners, you are the boss. So good for you, because not a lot of agency owners are. Good for you if you're an AE or an SDR, because you still have to have your boss and their boss's boss over your back that, hey, if you're not trending to hit quota that month and you posted that day, you better focus. You better get your energy where it's supposed to be, right? 20,000 reps on the phones. Don't dare post on LinkedIn, because we all know that doesn't work. Just kidding.
Well, hey, let's take a look at some stats that we got here for Steve. So it looks like while you were doing content publishing, your LinkedIn followers went from 4,000 to 28,000 over the course of 2.5 years. Founders in tech and software, which are part of your ICP, you grew that audience from 24 to 8,000.
Yep.
And then for the revenue results, you saw top line revenue go from $0 to 540K monthly recurring revenue in 8 months. So that's 54 customers at a monthly contract value of 10K a month.
Yep.
Right?
Yes, sir. We were riding high on the goose, man. Life is good.
What would you say, knowing what you know now, what would you advise others to do? What is like a couple key takeaways from this experiment with content marketing to grow the biz that you would share out with others?
I'd say 2 things. Number one is don't be afraid to do exactly kind of what I pointed out, which is take your Zoom, your meetings with the customer, then you're already allocating that time and you're not, call it wasting time or adding time. Go out and find somebody who's on Fiverr or Upwork and say, hey, here's what I want. I want you to take that, watch each one. There's about 10 hours a week. They'll watch it on like 2.5x. And so that's going to be, 4 hours of their time. Then they're going to micro it down, find the content pillars that work, and then they can start to get it to you. And then just do this, just start to post it. Everybody is afraid of people not liking them on camera. But here I can tell you this is, me too, right? Like, even though I don't care, I still have to okay, we're going to go on camera, But that almost makes me worse because I'm so used to it, Tony, that the excitement can be gone sometimes because it just feels like a second home. And so do that. And then 2 is do not be afraid to post it. Now, video is going to take over here too. So if you're living in text-based posts where LinkedIn has really thrived, Twitter will always kind of thrive, even though it's got into images as well. I know for a fact, and I can't disclose anything, but LinkedIn will favor video more and more. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised to see it go from a top down format to a left to right swipe format by the end of the year, where people are pushed to the video feed and text-based feed has to be opted in, and it's going to be harder to find. I think that is absolutely where LinkedIn is going. So I would get good at it, because if you don't like it, nobody cares. If you're not doing it, they won't know about you either, and they won't care if you don't like it.
Nice. I want to go ahead and bubble up another two things I thought were pretty impactful for folks that may be trying to use content to grow their audiences. And one is around the way you started measuring the success of the content by not just how many people were engaging in general, but a little bit more focus on who in your ICP, how many in your ICP are actually engaging, to differentiate it a bit, right?
Yeah, a lot of people, on LinkedIn, you see a lot of people post their, hey, it's my year in review, and they post their stats, but I'm always like, cool. The only one I care about is how many people in your LinkedIn feed or whatever came from the idea that, like, it doesn't matter if they're not in your ICP. That's really what I'm trying to get at, is like, we cannot benefit from this if you're not living in the majority of your ICP. Now, a majority of the people are going to have the benefit of a network effect, which means they don't always have to be in their ICP. And by someone else liking it, they can then see it if they're in the network of their ICP. But to me, I would say if 50% or greater of your following is not within your ICP or your target audience, content is always going to be a struggle, because you're starting over every time you switch industries, or you haven't focused on the people who can sign the paperwork in your decision-making process. If they're not reading the content you give up every day, someone else is serving them that content. I can guarantee you. I talked to a guy the other day who sells like low monthly spend software for barbershop owners to consolidate all the things into one dashboard, right? We were going through this, and I said, hey, here's the good news. The good news is you want to create content, you want to do it on Instagram and the appropriate channels. Here's the bad news. There's already about 180 U's out there who are doing something like this, who are trying to get in front of barbershop owners in urban neighborhoods in the top 20 metro. I mean, good luck. Instagram is flooded with them already. So like, the density of the people doing it today is only going to get bigger if you don't start today. That is a point. I could not drive that home any further. You cannot break through the noise. You have to pay to play in this game.
Got to pay to play. So I think what we just touched on is actually a very big, let's call it clue or hack when it comes down to, is it worth it to do content? Are you not selling when you're doing content? And if we combine what you just said, then you're definitely selling. When you're focused on your content, engaging your ICP, then you are selling through content marketing.
Yeah, that's my opinion of that. Call it is an example of really appropriating your content to hit the people who can make a decision, not just the people who can be a fan of you.
There it is. There it is. We will progress on this one to the next piece about your experience, which was your journey becoming the #1 place for top SDR talent, and how that affected your growth journey. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, there was a term, Tony, as somebody in your seat can appreciate, which is called controlled growth. And I remember sitting down with a guy who wanted to talk about being a fractional finance guy at first. And I was like, I don't need a finance guy. And he said, Steve, he goes, there's no doubt you can sell. He goes, but you've never ran a company. And I promise you, if you grow this thing as quick as you want to, it will topple you and it will pretty much ruin your life. And I remember getting out of there. I'm like, he might be right. But I'm going to go get the best talent, pay them the most money, because that's just the right thing to do, man. Right. And so we were offering OTEs of 100K, 60 base, some people as high as, north of 80 for a base, into a higher OTE, depending on the talent level, things that were relatively unheard of, especially in the SDR community. So having and being the voice of an SDR, although I never was an SDR, I was just a full cycle AE. So it was a fraction of my job. And then I really started to do the job of the SDR in 2017 when I joined Outreach, because that's what you are the first 3 months before you get a book that you're developing. And so being able to do that and speak to that audience worked really well, but being able to pay them a good amount of money and being podcast we did over time, like only content. You guys, so they're at work and they don't like their job, Tony. They're hearing this guy Steve get on ours never hit the micro content out of the podcast, a complete remote culture, which the podcast itself never gained like a big following. And we did COVID probably 25 episodes
driving
over a
it
year,
that
and it just
way,
never
but at the
really
same
took off.
time,
So
it was not.
I'd like to take another
nobody
stab
had
at that, like you guys are doing now. I think it's a great way
we didn't know about the challenges
to reach out. And like we talked about, Tony, we had a
So
lot of
we
new
took on those
talented
people,
as well,
and we were paying
and a lot of those videos
significantly more than the market
attracting
rate.
new talent.
There are great
So
performing
we
agencies
kind of
out there
acted as a
today that
recruiter
pay
for
half
us,
of
as
what
well
we were paying.
as a
So in
pipeline
hindsight, when
recruiter.
people say, what would you have changed? And this is not an indictment or a judgment on anybody who worked at Title, would be, I would have paid less, because obviously that would have been how you de-risk the operational capital to make sure that you're not always maxing out your threshold, right? And by paying, for example, market rate, out of it, Title would have had a net profit the first year, well north of a 1.5 million, instead of what it did, and probably would have changed the trajectory and the story of the company for a long time. Like, if most people were making the net profit, i.e. what the company makes. So since I was the sole owner of the company, I would have been the sole owner of, call it, that money, or that money would have sat in the bank account. So Steve never got rich out of Title. I was the fifth highest paid person in the company. Sure, there are perks to doing that. One thing I did not bring to the table, though, was the ability to see the operational and controls of the finance until it was far later than what I would have wanted it to be. And on top of that, like, I will admit first and foremost that I was the CEO who liked shiny new things, right? Typical new CEO. I like my software. I like this. And then people would also say, like, Steve, you were just hard to, like, I didn't want to say no to you. I didn't want to say, like, we shouldn't buy that, or I really think we shouldn't. And so there's certainly some things I've learned about too, is just my personality tends to be all in, right? Like, we're going, and sometimes that decision, and sometimes towards the end, like a lot of them, weren't the best decisions in terms of how to align finance and operations to the trajectory of the business. Not the best case scenario that Steve would come up with, or the way I'd try and wiggle out of a hole if we got into one, because those things start to work less and less. And you feel like a little bit like a rat at the end of a maze where there is no exit. And you're starting to butt your head up and going, the only thing I can really do is sell this, because it's not headed in a direction that I can financially support the business. And it's huge. Like, out of my bank account, my business bank account, Title's business bank account, there was well over $500,000 coming in, and well over, call it, unfortunately, more going out towards the end, right? That is a lot of freaking transactions every month. And I had hired people to take care of that. And some of them did a good job. Some of them did not, just quite frankly. But at the same time, I didn't have the acumen to say, oh, I trust you. You're just going to get it right. And then if I saw something, to second guess it. I was still leading business development, leading content, leading a lot of the growth. And I had 6 direct reports who were executives. Unfortunately, that is the one area that I didn't pay attention to enough. And it bit me in the ass, man, on the way out. Because, truth is Steve sitting here, a lot of people, had told me that people thought, like, Steve got rich, quote unquote, selling Title. Now, Steve's still sitting here. Steve's probably never had less money in his life, and never more opportunity to go, call it, make more income. But at the same time, like, what was the net of the whole, call it, drama of the 2.5 years of that? Brother, it's zero. It's -0, Tony.
Huh. Well, let's double click then on this. So you guys, you mentioned that the OTE earnings, the on target earnings that you all were offering SDRs in order to attract the best talent, was at 100K.
Yep.
And just for anybody listening, so you have a baseline in the Bridge Group's report, sales development report from 2021. They identified that most people pay their SDRs, regardless of being an agency, most companies, right? Their on target earnings are 76K. So that means that an SDR hired at Title was in the realm of 24K above, higher on target earnings than an SDR just working at any product company, technology company out there. Yeah. So that's pretty substantial. And then what I see is you got, in the way you had them deployed, you had customized action plans for client, use automation so that you wouldn't have to go too heavy on the staff part, right? Could keep the cost control there.
Yep.
And you had reps assigned to multiple client accounts. Yep. So more client coverage with the same reps would put you in a position to be able to get more revenue per head count.
See, that's where I got into trouble, Tony, right? Like you said, the agency owner starts to roll the dice and go, wait a second, if I just do this and then put that person on a third account and, they're cool, we'll give them a little extra
something, right? They'll make more money. Like trying to do more with less when it's people doesn't work so well. People are not tools, right? People's brains, the neuroplasticity, the neurodiversity, especially in an agency setting when you're typically hiring relatively early to mid-stage people in sales, right, are now saying yes because they want to do the right thing. And then we're seeing the performance go straight down because now the stress of that happening mixed with the stress of hearing the news, because I was very transparent very early on about what was happening with the company, on top of, call it, the daunting system switch that was about to happen to them in the next, call it 2 to 6 weeks. And it was always in front of them from switching from everything they work out of today to a new system. Man, we saw performance go down in such a major way that attrition went from sub 15% to above 40%. And you and I both know what that does when your average client's paying $10K a month and 40% of them leave within 45 days or given notice to leave when you're used to being one of the best. Brother, that's not normal. And so we did not see that coming. I did not have the foresight that I think I would now, or maybe in the future, to see those signals that once you start to have one problem with one client and then it starts to appear somewhere else, man, that's going to start to have that ripple effect. It's like the tapeworm got into your cybersecurity thing and it's just running endless loops now, right? And you got people and they talk to people and people gossip and tell the truth and do all sorts of things when you're not around them. Whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent, like that was now overtaking the organization. But so going back to the 100K, it really didn't matter what we were paying at this time. I still needed to, obviously, we had already agreed to that, right? So we were operating in that structure, trying to get out of it, where hindsight, I will say too, as someone said, what would you have done differently? I said, differently, man, I would have gone back right when I knew that was happening. And I would have said, okay, everybody, like we've either got to have a workforce reduction or we're going to have to look at a pay cut, right? Or I would have said, I'm not even going to say we're going to have to do one or the other. I just came in and did it because what I've learned is that my ultimate job was to ensure the profitability of the company. It was not to be the strategic visionary. Like that was number 2, not number 1. And so number 1 is to be the financial oversight of the company and the health of that. So I failed the company in that sense, but I learned a lot in the process. And I think at a minimum, if you can take that out of it, you have to be able to take that out of it, because you ain't taking money out of it. You better take something.
Well, that's good insight. That's a good insight there around. So to sum it up, we had this approach of become the best with the hypothesis was having the best SDR talent, which you would attract by paying at the top of the market, would lead to higher levels of client success. What you discovered is that you experienced 10% or attrition from 10% to above a 40%.
Yep.
Within 60 days or so. And the other part of that was that as the clients churned, well, the SDRs would stay on because they were there for the paycheck, right?
Yeah. They didn't have a client to work, or if their performance was low, we're not on a 90-day PIP cycle. Agencies like, what'd you do for me lately? And I learned that the hard way, right? Is you don't have that traditional 3-month PIP where HR sits down in their warm voice and says, now what we really want to do, right? Because if they're failing clients, the clients will leave. And then we're failing the clients as business. And when they're the only one or one of two who's, doing the future of that client's business, right, wrong, or indifferent, if that's what they're depending on, it's a lot of pressure. And so making the decisions that have to be made in an agency are not easy. I think that's, and thank God for the community, right? I've learned so much from 2 or 3 people I've met through the Cloud Task community, sharing some of these, call it knowledge learning sessions with, instead of talking about what happened, right? Don't care about that. Like what can we do to learn together? How can we be better? And how can we support the community better to be better agencies for tomorrow, and to breed better agency owners out of thinking and steering them the right way through community? And this is certainly one of them, is this podcast. Because if I would have listened to this podcast 3 years ago, and I would have probably approached things significantly differently than I did.
Well, with no further ado, then let's get down to the last piece of this story about selling at the highest valuation a 45% profit margin could get. How did that go? How did that come about? How did you decide that you were ready to exit the business? And then what actions did you take? And ultimately, how close to that maximum earnout or payout did you get?
Yeah, I'll start at the end. I'm nowhere close on the payout, right? So let's just say I couldn't have missed further in terms of the benefit to me, the business owner, right? Which is what we're talking about.
And when I said -0, let's just say -0, right? Because there was more to that I simply won't talk about publicly due to contracts and contractual things. But really, if you look down at the net of it, is what did I want to sell it at? I didn't want to sell it at all at first. I remember even getting a couple calls at first. And then my interest was perked, right? Because there was a lot of noise on the internet. So I listed on Micro Acquire. We had a couple of interesting inquiries, big, F500 company out of Canada had actually gone 2 calls deep on it. So now what I learned from those first 2 calls is there's some discovery there, right? And what they said is, hey, I bet you the next 6 to 12 months will be really hard for you. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? And they say that growth from 5 to 10 million on your own cash is going to be really difficult. And I was like, no. And I kind of get off the call and be like, maybe they're right. And so as I started hearing more and more about this, like eventually, like who I ended up making a business decision with was somebody who came in online via LinkedIn to the general inquiry box to watch a demo and secret shop us, right? So what they were offering, obviously, and sort of call it what happened in the reality couldn't be any more different in terms of a start and end point. But what I had looked to earn from the business was, as I wanted to get at least a 3x EBITDA. Too bad our EBITDA sucked, right? And so then I was like just trying to sell the business for top line revenue. Well, top line revenue was good, but it was starting to go down the last 3 months. Like it's harder to sell when your people aren't focused and the revenue is going down. So you're bleeding almost while you're trying to sell it in real time. So a lot of lessons learned there in terms of, if you're in the services business, brother, you're not getting 10x. Your margins are not 88%. They're not even close to that. They're probably on the best day, which is usually the first day you open, they're probably 50%. And then they probably will go as low as 20%. If you're like me, you'll get down to the single digits and still be holding on for your dear life.
So then without hitting the 45% margin, when you got ready to sell, you would say then it's not about these 10x valuations that people are normally like trying to do 10x revenue as if they're a software company when you're dealing with a service business. That would be based off of EBITDA.
Yeah, EBITDA, right? Well, just go to ChatGPT-4 and type in EBITDA, right? So you can figure out how to run the formula. In a services business, you don't have a lot of margin, therefore you don't have a lot of net earnings, and that the earnings before and go look at the rest is really what matters. Is our EBITDA was nothing. By the end of it, there were no earnings to speak of. And so really the only thing that they consider in services-based business is how profitable are you and for how long? And they're looking for a steady customer base that wants to come back year over year, not every 4 months. They just don't care about that. Like nobody's going to invest in companies, especially agencies who typically have high attrition, who are on 4 to 6 month contracts. They want 12-month contracts. They want to see a high margin. But if it's people who are running your business, they really don't care. And nobody really wants to buy you outside of the occasional acquisition that happens with the sappers of the world and things like that. But that was still process. They were buying more than people. So they'll buy your process before they'll buy your people, for sure.
Okay. So they buy your process before they buy your people. And when it comes to what influences the valuation the most, actually sounds like customer retention is more important than top line revenue. So customer retention and then the profitability piece on there, right? Like how efficiently can you run the operation? So they have that combination of people stay with you for a long time and you've got decent margins working within your business.
That's it, man.
All right. Well, look, I'm going to wrap up with 3 tips and that I took away from these 3 aspects of the conversation. And then you could see if you have anything that you would add to them before we wrap. Takeaway number 1, using content marketing to grow your client base and your talent base more efficiently. Go look at your audience on LinkedIn. Who are your top 3 job titles? And if they're not in your ICP, then it doesn't matter. That's 1. Takeaway 2, paying talent at the top of the market. So paying talent at the top of the market does not mean you'll get top performance out of them. And clients churn when they don't get the value they want. Low client retention plus high employee retention equals financial implosion. So you could have the best employees or the best team, but if they're not delivering the best results, then you are probably going to be on the road to financial ruin.
That's right.
And the third one is the most responsible thing that you could have done was reduce the workforce by 40 to 50% as soon as you saw some misalignment between client retention and this top talent SDRs that you all had on payroll, right? And eliminate, and the second piece there is eliminate difficult, lower paying clients so that you could get the books in order, lift your EBITDA, keep people longer because you're delivering good results. And ultimately that would have led to a higher valuation when you decide to exit. Anything you'd add to that, or did I capture the three big themes?
You got it, man. I got to run to the next one, Tony. This is awesome. Thank you so much, man.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time, Steve. Audience, those of you out there listening, I hope you got some good value out of it. If you're running an agency, hyper growth at all costs is not all it's cracked up to be. Focus on operational effectiveness, and let's all grow strong together, guys. Have a great one.